Thank you for joining us for our opt-in webinar today. We're very glad to have you here today. My name's Nick Ellinger from Donor Voice. I'm sorry I am not Roger Craver. I am the cheap replacement for Roger Craver, so I hope not to disappoint you too awful much. And with me today is Dr. Kiki Kumeredo. Kiki, please correct that pronunciation for me.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay. And she is a behavioral scientist working with Donor Voice as well.
Hello, everyone.
So a couple of housekeeping notes before we launch into the webinar today. As you may or may not know, this is the third of 3 webinars in our behavioral science series. We have 2 previous webinars, one on the science of ask strings and the other on how to set up a multi-gift program, archived. There are links at donorvoice.com/webinars. Then we're already in planning stages for our next bevy of webinars. So if you want to sign up at donorvoice.com/blog to get other webinars and upcoming white papers on this and other topics, we'd really appreciate it. And we're very happy to be doing this with the Agitator today. So if you want to subscribe to the Agitator, that's at agitator.net/subscribe. So today we're going to cover why opt-in as a paradigm and then talk about how to do opting in effectively, how defaults can be very powerful, and then how behavioral principles can substantially increase your opt-in rate. And hopefully that'll be valuable for everyone. As we go through this, feel free to use the questions box as part of GoToWebinar to ask any questions that you have. We will try to get to as many questions as we possibly can, some during the webinar and some at the end. If we do not get to your question, rest assured that we will be able to follow up by email and have a conversation there. Hopefully it will be an interactive experience for you and we'll be able to answer any and all questions that you have. So the big question, why do a webinar about opting in? And the big thing that we're seeing is going back to 1999, Seth Godin's Permission Marketing book, still a classic. He talks about how selling to people who actually want to hear from you is more effective than interrupting hundreds, thousands of strangers who don't want to hear from you. And he talked about how with interruption marketing, as he referred to it, we respond to everyone around us turning up the volume knob to 11 by us turning up the volume knob to 11. And so there's an idea of more is more, trying to get more interruption in people's faces more and more. But that only diminishes the effectiveness of your message and messages overall. So instead, he said that one of the ways that you can be most effective is by going to permission marketing, seeking out those people who want to hear from you and talking to them. This is from a nonprofit that we're working with that will remain nameless, but this is the pretty linear relationship by the number of years on file that you've had and the number of communications you've received over that time. So pretty much the number of communications that you receive from the organization is a function of how long you've been on their file and vice versa. But the trick is that the number of this is when charities opt in their donors. So if you get an acquisition piece from a nonprofit, you mail in a check, you are signed up to their mail stream, to their communication stream. And as a constituent, you don't know what that stream is. You don't know how many pieces you're going to get. You don't know if they're going to do an e-append and opt you into email or a phone append and put you in their telemarketing. There's this uncertainty that you have and a lack of control over your communications. And that's a sneak peek because control is going to be an important aspect of what we talk about today. The trick with these increasing number of communications is that the number of communications sent per year goes down over time. And the reason for that is that there are several studies that show that as you ramp up communications more and more, the more you actually turn people off. You're increasing donor irritation. And those donors, while they will tend to give more gifts in the near term, are less likely to retain in the long term. So what you see is that donors are opting out, whether they explicitly call you up and say, I'm never donating again. That's actually the good case because you don't have to waste any more money on them. The bad case is that they simply stop responding. So the other challenge, so that's the challenge side of things. There's also an opportunity side of things. All nonprofits are fishing in the same waters. We have the same donor base that we're going after. The average donor gives to 6 different nonprofits. You get your acquisition lists by renting and exchanging from other folks. We use co-ops. And there's a reason for this. It's much easier to go for someone who you know is already philanthropic, someone who is already channel responsive, whether that's mail, phone, or email, and get them to give to another organization than it is to get someone who doesn't have those channel preferences or a philanthropic bent to make a gift. However, that means that as we all fish the same waters and we're all turning up the volume knob on our communications, the more that pool is being bombarded. In our last webinar, Josh Wichard talked about how those average donors give to 6 different nonprofits, and the average nonprofit sends out about 50 communications asking for money in any given year between mail, phone, and email. Also other means, but those are the big 3. So that person's getting 250, 300 communications from different nonprofits, not to mention those additional nonprofits that are trying to get them to donate to their 7th different nonprofit. So what if you could find your own pond? And that's the power of opt-in. You can use all of the good things that you're doing, events, advocacies, petitions, on-site, on-website newsletter signups, for contests, surveys, your content marketing, all of these things to get people engaged with you and get them to give you permission to communicate with them who haven't yet donated. And the advantage is that those people, well, some of them, in fact, a lot of them will already be on someone else's file. Some of them have a unique tie to their mission, and they become your donors. They're not just nonprofit donors. They belong to your organization. And so you have your own set of unique snowflakes that you can market to. So that's the why to opting in. And Kiki is going to talk a little bit more about the regulatory environment that leads into opting in, as well as behavioral tricks to get people to opt in and sign on that dotted line. So Kiki?
Yeah, hello again. When it comes to opt-in versus opt-out choice, it's pretty obvious that more effective is using an opt-out. In getting people to do something, using an opt-out will get you there. Defaults are extremely powerful at influencing our choices, and we usually go for them whether the decision is as small as choosing a software for our latest update or as big as deciding to become an organ donor. Now, this graph here shows the percentage of drivers who agreed to donate their organs. And you can see 2 types of countries. Countries on the right that donate a lot, almost 100% of drivers agreed to become an organ donor, and countries on the left that donate much less. Less than 30% of the drivers become organ donors. Now, why is this? Most people think that this difference has to do with culture. But countries that we think of as very similar, like Sweden and Denmark, are very different when it comes to organ donations. So what's going on here? It turns out that it's all to do with the forms that these drivers filled in at the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency. And you can have a look here that the countries on the left had a form that says, tick the box if you want to participate, if you want to become organ donor. People don't tick the box and they don't join. The countries on the right had a slightly different form. It said, tick the box if you don't want to become an organ donor. Again, people don't tick the box, but this time they join. So defaults and especially opt-outs are very powerful, and many decisions we make, even important ones like this one, don't reside in us. In this case, they reside in the person that designs the form. This has made defaults an increasingly common form of influence. By setting an option as the default, policymakers and marketeers have a simple but powerful way to sway choices. but defaults are so effective that people have raised concerns that they are or could be used unethically or irresponsibly. If you're in the EU, you're aware of this. You know that a new fundraising legislation is going to be introduced in 2018 and reflects exactly these increasing concerns. For those outside in the EU, so that you're on the same page, there is a regulatory pressure to move to opt-in, or otherwise phrased as explicit consent, in order to contact people. The new legislation is beyond the scope of this session, and it's not yet clear what exactly is going to be. However, it already has material effect on business right now. This here is a part of a telemarketing script, acquiring new donors. And this is how the telephone call ends. As you can read it, it's not the best way possible to inspire people and prevent them from opting out. But this is what some charities are trying to do, to keep new supporters aboard and preventing them from opting out. Is this the best way to do it? We'll come back to that later. Other charities have already moved towards opt-in in all their comms. This is an example of such a charity and their announcement on their website. They expect this move to cost them millions. And again, one could ask, is this the best way to phrase this and go about it? Again, we'll talk about that later. All that these efforts show is that the culture and the mindset have changed. Charities are already operating differently, and they are trying to introduce levels of permission marketing to tackle this. Even if you're in a part of the world where this legislation won't affect you, first of all, the same thing could happen anywhere. But even if it doesn't, and you don't have a gun to your head for forcing opt-in, you have to think whether opting out serves you and your donors best. Moving to opt-in, yes, it might mean fewer people, but it also means you get people who actively choose to be contacted. Like Nick said, this way you don't waste your time, money, and effort on people who merely forgot to opt out and have no interest in whatever you tell them. Someone who forgot to opt out of a newsletter, campaign alert, or other activity is sure to do so anyway when they first get the chance, or they will end up ignoring what you send them. We want people to choose to opt in, as this means we'll have a highly committed and loyal audience. An opt-in choice could be a more effective way to bring the right supporters aboard and also to keep them. And there are lots of different opt-in and opt-out decisions made every day. In fact, any direct marketing ask for time, money, or information is the donor deciding to say yes or no. But how you execute the opt-in ask is paramount. Here's an example of an email opt-in ask. It's at the bottom of a reply form and provides no real compelling reason why I should opt in. Same thing for a sign up to a newsletter ask. And this here is a message that someone receives after they unsubscribe. The message itself reinforces opting out. Great, you'll never hear from us again, as if this is a good thing. What's worse is this example where there is a default opt-in and there is no way you can opt out. As you can read, it says that by making this donation, you will receive updates, and there is no way you can not do this. Is this the best way to opt people in? Here is another example asking for email, but this time it's from the commercial world. This is already a much more considered effort. It uses loss aversion, never miss out again. It uses regionalization, find out about local events. And more importantly, the emails are customized to the person's interests and identity. So opt-in is a much better alternative. How could it work? We got a glimpse from this weekly email ask of what the answer might be. And as the title of the webinar suggests, it's by using behavioral science. We ran an online study testing the effect of several behavioral science principles that are listed here to see how they affect preference towards an opt-in ask. For each of these principles, we created multiple executions in the form of statements or pictures. Once we had these, we combined them to create various opt-in requests. We then presented pairs of these requests, as shown here, and we asked people to choose the one they preferred, the one on the left or the one on the right. Each participant made 12 such choices. This multivariate testing methodology allows us to compare all principles' executions to each other while replicating how decisions are made in real life. Now let's see the executions that we've created. The first principle we tested was conformity. There is evidence that the presence of a pair of eyes can increase compliance to a request. There was actually a study done in a workplace where they placed a pair of eyes on the kitchen cupboards, and that made people be more tidy. So people comply to requests when they think other people are watching them. We also know that people tend to follow the direction of someone's gaze. So we thought that by introducing an image of a person looking at you or towards the opt-in box, it might increase conformity with the request to opt in. And we had different executions of this. We had a person looking away, a person looking straight at a camera, so at you basically, or a person looking at the opt-in box. This is how they look like, the pictures. And like I said, people made a preference choice, which resulted in different scores for each execution. All of these pictures were compared to a control where there was no picture. Now here are the preference scores. These can vary between 0 and 100. The higher the score is, the higher the preference is. Also, the scores reflect magnitude of the effect. A score of 50 is twice as effective as a score of 25. So the first thing you notice is that all of these executions were preferred more than the control. And all of them have a higher score than 51. The most preferred execution, with a score of 72, is the one where the person is looking straight at you. This is followed by the picture of someone looking away, and lastly, a picture of someone looking at the opt-in box. So now we have evidence that conformity could work, and we also know which execution might work best.
And Kiki, one other thing that you see in the literature is that people follow people's eyes and respond well to people's eyes. There are other ways of drawing attention and eyes to a default. We talked a little bit about this in the opt-in webinar, but circles and arrows and things like that to the default option can also increase that conformity effect, correct?
Yes, definitely. And like I'll say at the end, there are multiple executions of each of these principles. These are just examples that we used, but of course there can be many others that we could test, and different executions could be more appropriate for different goals or needs, what you want to achieve. The second principle we tested is the foot in the door effect. We've all done this at some point in our lives. It's when we start with a question or a statement that can only have an affirmative answer, and this then increases the likelihood to agree with what comes next. So we thought that by having an initial question where people will say yes to, might increase agreement to subsequent opt-in ask. And these are the various executions that we created. Would you also like to know how your money is used? Would you like to know the impact of your donation? Would you be interested in news, updates, ways to support impact of donation or beneficiary stories? This was lifted exactly from a charity's website, by the way. Would you also like us to keep you updated about our work and how you can help? And here are the results. As you can see, all of the scores, if you remember the previous scores on conformity, you'll notice that all of these are much lower. The previous one started at 70 and the lowest was 59. So this immediately helped us rank the importance of the principles themselves as well as the individual executions within each principle. I'll show you the ranking order of all principles based on their importance later. So as you can see here, 3 of our statements performed better than having no statement at all. The first statement, how your money is used, and the third one, the impact of your donation, they basically convey the same message, and yet they differ significantly. This could be because the language is simpler in the first statement, or because it also hints on effectiveness of the charity. Whatever the reason, this goes to show that very small copy changes can have a big effect on people's responses. Another thing I'd like to draw your attention on is the last statement, the one that got a score of 40. This actually performed as bad or even slightly worse than having no statement at all. This stresses again how important it is to put a lot of thought when creating such statements, but also the importance of testing them. Small changes can have a big impact, and a negative one at that. The third principle we tested is the use of social labels. We tend to act consistently with who we believe we are, and labels can prime beliefs about our identities. So we thought that if we label donors as prosocial or reformed, they might agree to opt in to receive further information to serve this primed identity. And again, here are our executions. We use the label in the beginning of the opt-in ask. So the first one is our control condition. Please tick this box so we may continue sending you information about our work. This one has no label. And then we introduced different labels: as a supporter of this cause, as a life changer, as a knowledgeable person, as a well-informed person. And here are the results. The one that came first was as a supporter of this cause. It got a really high preference rating of 79. And then further down, it was life changer, and this was again better than the control. What's interesting is that the other two executions, well-informed person and knowledgeable person, they performed worse than having no label at all. And once again, this is why we need to test, because not all executions will work.
And significantly worse, to the point that well-informed is less than half as good as supporter. And even the second place, life changer or default, are handily beating well-informed or knowledgeable. And so it's very interesting that it's so specific to the organization and what they feel about themselves as they're being labeled.
Yeah, and another thing I should probably mention here is the only reason we used well-informed and knowledgeable is because we try to tell people that communication could also be about things that could keep you informed, to prime this kind of identity, so that people might opt in. Obviously, for different opt-in asks, different labels will be relevant, more relevant. And of course, if the language is simpler, like as a supporter, then immediately you see that people go for the simple statement, simple label. Now, another principle that we tested is relates to actions and not your labels. Reminding people what they've done, that they've done something in the past, might prompt them to repeat the same or similar behavior in the future. So that's what we tried to do. We said we'll remind people that they have donated or taken an action for your charity in the past and see whether that would increase the likelihood to opt in. And these are the executions of this principle. Thank you for supporting this cause in the past. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being interested. And thank you for helping. And here are the results again. All of these statements performed better than the control. Helping was the most preferred, with the other ones ranking lower. We also tested social proof, the idea that we are sensitive to how other people behave, and especially people that are similar to us. So knowing that other people like you are opting in might increase the chance of you opting in. And again, we used different executions. Other people like you receive more information about us. Thousands of people like you receive more information. 70% of people like you receive more information. Other people like you in your region receive more information about us. And these are the results. Once again, 2 of our executions performed better than the control. Thousands of people like you and other people like you. And 2 of the executions were worse than not having a social proof statement at all. And again, this is all about not making assumptions that all social proof executions will work. Social proof works no matter what, and just go with them. We need to test the specifics. Right, so I promised you that I will show you the ranking order of all principles based on their importance. Now, here it is. Conformity was the second most important principle, the one that is using a picture of someone looking at you or the opt-in box. And this was followed by the rhetorical question, ensuring a positive attitude. Social labels followed, then mentioning past actions. And the least important principle was social proof, one of the most promoted in the popular literature and conferences, by the way. But the single most important principle was perceived control. Giving people autonomy and control over a decision may reduce reactance and minimize the desire to move away from the original request. There are obviously many ways you could deliver on control. What we examined in this study was giving control over the communication stream. We decided to do this because we believe that the business model is broken as it's solely based on volume. This is how many communications a donor might receive in a month. In this case, that's me. And this is a screenshot of my inbox. This volume of communication and in multiple channels can have a negative consequence. It can drive people away and it can lead to active opt-outs. This is because over-solicitation has been found to create irritation. This is a study, and there are others backing this data up, showing that excessive mailing can have a negative impact on annual donation. The irritation caused by excessive mailing also has an additional negative impact on annual donation. So sending too much mailings could be counterproductive. There is also evidence that people are frustrated about the lack of control over whether or not they were approached for fundraising and the lack of transparency over how their details were acquired. So maybe we can address the irritation donors feel and the reduced donations caused by over-solicitation by giving donors the control they crave for. Going back to our study, we gave donors control over the frequency or the way that they will be contacted and see whether that would increase their likelihood to opt in. So compared to lack of any control, we gave participants control over two things. The first was channel. You can see here we gave them the options of email, text, post, and phone, and we also tested whether there are any context effects. In this case, having a phone option might make email and post more attractive compared to a version that doesn't have a phone option. The second type of control we gave them was frequency. And once again, we also tested for context effects to see whether removing annually might make any other of the options more attractive. Now, here are the results. We immediately see that any type of control is better than not having any, significantly better than not having any. And what is quite interesting and very helpful for the charities to know is that giving channel control is better or as effective as frequency control. When given the direct chance to reduce volume by changing the frequency, donors actually preferred channel control instead, the less direct way to control volume. The commercial world is already giving consumers control. And these here are screenshots of unsubscribed pages offering the consumer the option to control either the frequency or content of communications or both. There is no reason why this couldn't happen for charities too. We've seen that you could get away by using channel preference to avoid the controversial control over frequency. But could you also imagine using or offering control over the content to match people's preferences? This is a mock-up that we created of a hypothetical unsubscription page where you could say something along the lines, we'd like to stay in touch with you, but only in ways you find helpful. Please update your preferences to only receive emails on topics that are important to you or to unsubscribe completely. And then we can offer donors control over the content. Would you like to know how your money is used, beneficiary stories, emergency situation, the progress you help us make, and they can switch it on and off, and offer them control over the channel they'd like to be communicated to. As you notice, we also use the conformity image that was effective, as well as the label of generous supporter. And of course, we offer an option to unsubscribe from all communications. But there is no reason why you should wait till the unsubscription stage and offer this as a last resort. You could instead offer this to all your supporters right from the start, at acquisition. Obviously, there are many ways this could be executed and at different stages in the supporter journey, which brings me to the last slide. The devil is in the details. You can't, and I would definitely not recommend using all this and apply it straight away. The reason for this is because these findings, first of all, are based on an online test that measured preference. More testing is needed to show how actual opt-in rates are affected by the use of these principles. We now have a very good indication of what might work based on this study, which reduces the amount of tests needed, but we still need to test them in the field to be absolutely certain of what works. It's also the case that different principles may be relevant to achieve different goals. Nudging opt-in for events will require different thinking than nudging opt-in for fundraising appeals. So careful consideration of the end goal and the literature is needed before deciding which principles to test. There may be principles out there that we haven't tested and are better for your goals. The execution of the principles is as important as their presence or not. We've seen how some executions had a negative result, and it would have been better if they weren't present. So again, considered thought is required when creating the executions, and it may also be the case that these will differ for each of you due to your specific brand guidelines, needs, or goals. Finally, audience selection. The people you show each execution to also has to be carefully considered. For example, when social proof works, it cuts both ways. I'll share with you an example from an American energy company. You may be aware of this. They wanted to nudge their customers to spend less energy. So on the bill, they showed how much energy you consumed compared to your neighbors. People that were consuming more energy, they reduced their energy consumption. But people that were consuming less energy than their neighbors, they started consuming more. So again, you need to think who sees what. So I'll end this session with this word of caution. It's not as simple as learning that a behavioral principle has been effective in a different setting and applying it. The way you will execute it and to which audience you're going to use it will make all the difference. You need expert advice on which principles to select and on how and where to use them. In case you'd like to talk to us about a tailored solution for your organization, or you want to chat about the findings or the methodology or any questions, don't hesitate to contact me or Nick. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.
And please keep those questions coming through the GoToWebinar section. We have a number of good ones. One thing that I would add on audience selection is there is some research that indicates that folks who are older tend to be more responsive to social proof and conformity appeals. So that's another thing to take into account. Looking at the questions that we have, a lot of questions about the idea of control, because that was so powerful with being control literally twice as good as not having control. Looking at channel control versus frequency control, we have a couple of questions around a lot of the complaints that we get as nonprofits are that that you're mailing me too much, that you're contacting me too much, those sorts of things. How do you square that with this result on channel control versus frequency, that it's actually people desire more control over the channel than over the frequency?
If people had control over something, I think complaints would go down anyway, because once we've made a choice, we feel responsible for it. So if you give people a preference on channel, they immediately feel they can control the amount of information they get by choosing which channel to receive that to. So it doesn't affect volume per se, but it's the perception that matters. This is how psychology works. It's whether I perceive it to be annoying or not. And if I choose a channel that I like, or, okay, the danger is that I can easily ignore, like email, then I immediately feel more relieved. So that's how it would tackle that complaint. But of course, there is no reason why, if you're brave enough, not offer a frequency control to your donors.
So it may be worthwhile to try to combine these?
As we've seen, they were as effective, and one of the channel options was slightly more effective than frequency. It's up to, like I said, the specific execution depends on how the charity wants to function itself. Whether you feel comfortable with giving people frequency control, then of course you should. And again, why not? If someone wants to receive one mailing a year, this doesn't mean they're not interested in you and what you're doing. This doesn't mean they're not going to donate. It might actually increase their commitment because they receive the single mailing they're interested in at the time that they're interested in. So yeah, you can combine them, use either, both.
A related question, if you do offer that type of channel control, email, text, post, or phone, and someone chooses only email, does that impact retention because you can only email them and emails aren't as often opened and responded to?
Yeah, good question. This study, like I said, is an initial step. Another study or efforts could be aimed at looking how you can make people choose more than one option. So this isn't the end of this. This is just the starting point, and another project could be how can we make people tick email but also mail. So that's one thing. The second is if someone chooses just email, they might do so because it's easier for them, more convenient, but also because it's easier to ignore. Then the question shifts on how to make your emails more effective, how to use subject lines that are better. And that again opens up a completely different conversation where you can use behavioral science principles to optimize subject lines and the content of your emails, and taking into account your donors' preferences and identity if possible.
One thing that I would add there is that that idea of using the donor's preferences in the customization of the email can be particularly powerful. So if someone has said to you, I only want to receive emails, playing that back to you in the email, but playing that back to them in the email saying, you requested that we only send you emails, and so I have this urgent thing that I want you to know about. That lets them know that you know that it's being respected, and they know that this is the only time I'm going to hear about that. They're respecting my wishes, and you can then see higher open rates and response rates within the email. The other part that I would say is that if someone opts out of mail, best to get them to do it, frankly, early. You know, you see that retention rates after first gift are generally around 25 to 30% in that first year. And so knowing that someone isn't going to respond to a mail piece ahead of time and that they'd rather get email, that's something that's better to know early rather than late.
Yeah, definitely. And to add to the preferences, it's not just playing back to them that they only want to be contacted by email, but we're talking about offering people control over content. And if you have that information, sending emails that are relevant to them and things that interest them, that immediately increases their engagement and likelihood to respond.
Yeah. And then some questions around the idea of different channels. A lot of the examples, because we have an opt-in culture on email, whereas we don't as much offline, how do you get online donors to enter direct mail preferences? How do you get donors who are offline to give you their online information? And if you were setting this up on the mail side, would you set it up in the initial ask, or would you set it up in the acknowledgement?
These are two different questions. The first one, how could you change channels, basically ask information online for offline? Again, and I know this will be very repetitive, but again, if you make it relevant to their needs, identities, and preferences, people will respond. So if you tell them, if, for example, they signed up for an event and you have a pack that you have to send them, and you need their address, mail address, they will give it to you because it's relevant. It makes sense, right? So that's the principle that needs to be translated to every other efforts to gain this information. So it's not like this is an email, this is some information for you. By the way, could you give us your address? No one will do it. You have to provide a compelling reason that matches their preferences so that they will do it. So that's the answer to the first one. And the second one is whether I would ask for preferences from the beginning or when?
Or on the thank you or subsequent ask.
It's all about getting as much information from as many people as possible. So I would suggest adding it at acquisition wouldn't hurt. Actually might result in more people replying. And it also creates a very positive image for the charity right from the start. So I would do it straight away after their donation, or if it's a mail pack, on the reply form.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement there that the answer to do you want it in the initial ask or subsequent asks or acknowledgement is yes. You want it in all of those things. If they don't tell you their preferences up front, continuing to ask to make sure that you're creating a positive experience for them. And then stop asking when you get the information. So it's quite often on our mail pieces, we'll have the line, put your email in here if you want to receive email updates from us. But we mail everyone with that same line, whether we have their email or not. So customizing that part on the reply device so that you know that the person's getting email and you can ask for other things. Perhaps it's topic preferences like Kiki talked about earlier, can be very valuable. So we have a couple of questions around methodology of the study. Can you talk a little bit about how the online preference was measured? Did you ask them to indicate which they preferred, or was it some other way?
Yes, and I'm sorry because it wasn't clear enough. We created versions of opt-in pages, let's call them that, and each person had in front of them at a given time, two versions, one on the left and one on the right. And the wording was something like, please choose the version you prefer the most, the version you prefer the most. So it wasn't about opting in, it was look at these two versions and click option A or option B, depending on which one you prefer the most. And the reason we did this is to increase the validity of our results. If you ask someone repeatedly, because each participant had to do this for a number of times, so if we ask them repeatedly whether they would opt in here and again there, then that reduces the validity of the responses. After a while, they lose interest. Sharing which one they prefer, it makes sense. No matter how many choices they have to do, always you might prefer one more than the other. So that keeps the validity of our results stable while we get an indication of what might work, because behind the scenes, all executions are compared to each other through the multivariate testing.
And this is actually a methodology that we use at Donor Voice with a number of our clients, where we're able to test with a small number of respondents, about 400 respondents. You're able to test 6 different variables, 5 different permutations of it. So unlike your traditional A/B test, you can put all of these aspects in there, testing a teaser and a message and a signer and a supplemental benefit and which premium is going to work best and those sorts of things, and then have a number of items in each category. And because it can have, it breaks it down into a series of yes, no choices, you get to see the aggregation of what a number of people do and compare across there. So it's a really powerful tool for testing a number of things simultaneously.
Just to get an idea, by using this pretest tool in this study, we managed to have 64,000 separate A/B tests. So, and that was within a single study that didn't last more than a couple of weeks. So you can see how powerful this is to test different iterations immediately, one against each other.
And then a follow-up question to that. Isn't it the case that a lot of times what people say they will do and what they actually do is a good bit different?
Completely true. That's, yeah, never trust anyone. Yes, the way the questions are phrased is really important. That was part of the reason we ran the test the way we did. We didn't directly ask opt-in, and this is the reason why. So yeah, like I said, the way you execute the questions will have an impact. But in this case, it's not about, this is mostly true, the statement, if we ask people to imagine what they would do in the future. If you ask them about what they prefer, they can really say what they like. They like to be contacted via mail or email or text or phone. This is not about predicting a future behavior. This is not about asking them whether they will vote next year or whether they will donate. It's all about sharing what your preference is. So in that context, you can trust what people say.
I'd agree with that. Very generally, people know what they like and what they don't like. What they're really bad at assessing is why they like what they like. And so when you go levels deep in a survey and say, pick A or B, and then, well, why is it? Does this image make you feel confident? Does it make you all of these sorts of other things? That's when you get almost no good usable data.
Yes.
We've taken this multi-test tool, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to test it in circumstances where there's also an A/B test that parallels what we've seen, and the what people say versus what they do correlation is fairly strong. Another question is on methodology is there going to be a follow-up study about the cumulative giving over 5 years for folks who have expressed preferences?
I wish.
Yes, unfortunately, this was kind of a moment in time test
Yeah.
rather than uh, a ongoing thing. But I would strongly recommend last week's multi-gift webinar because in that you can see this type of thinking put into practice where an organization used control over your gifts to ask for multiple gifts over the period of a year. And they found that about 7% of people responded to it, and of those people, 60%, and this is in the male, made their second gift out of 4 in that. So those people were already hitting what they were assumed to give in the full year in a 3-month period. So you can see the impact of this in the short term, but unfortunately we don't have years worth of data to go deep into this type of testing yet.
What I'd like to add is when we did this study, which was this summer, the goal and the aim was to test it in the field with charities that are interested in finding a solution to this problem. And we do have a couple of in-market participants that were starting to build the test. So there will be a follow-up, but it will be specific to the charities we're working with to solve their particular interests and problems. And we're interested in this because, like I said, this was an online study. We want to do this in the field, and we'll do it with the participants we found, but we're interested in doing more. So if anyone would like to participate, then definitely. And if you'd like to participate in a longer term study to see the longer term effects, we could do that.
Yeah. Totally agree. We should have we will be presenting our long-term test results in a webinar 4 years and 9 months from now. Looking at the idea of controlling preferences by channel, will that create a lot of people that have mail codes on them where it's mail 1 time per year, no mail or no email? Doesn't that kind of limit your audience and the scope that you're going to have?
Well, you also have control on what choices you provide to people. So yes, obviously, if you give every single option to choose every number of communications they receive in a year, and it can vary from 0 to 100, yes. But you can be in charge of that and say, I will only have 3 options. Mail me every month, mail me once a year, and something in between. So you can be in control of what you put out there for people to then choose. You might want to have the other part of this is you need to be able to listen to your donors. So if someone calls you and they request either less frequent mailings or more, who knows, then you should be able to service that. But yeah, that should be on the feedback. Contact us if you have any questions or requests, not part of the control that you give up front.
Okay, those were all of the questions that we had today. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to the webinar. You've been looking at our email addresses here for a little while, so feel free to email Kiki or me or both with any questions that you have. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar for those who weren't able to join it, or if you want to be able to share it with colleagues who were not here. Feel free to reach out to us, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.